What's up, everybody? It's Mr. Hill, and I just wanted to go over a couple of things with you guys for the Modified DBQ so that you guys are very familiar with what is expected of you guys for this AP test. So I'm going to pull this up right now so that we can see it, and we'll go over it. Okay, so first things first, it's changed. It is only 45 minutes. So we have only 45 minutes to do this thing. Let's see. Oh, let's do that. There we go. That's better. Okay. So 45 minutes and it's out of 10 points. Normally it's out of 7 points. They've actually added in some additional points in here. And I think those are points that are going to make this easier than the initial DBQ. For instance, you get a point just by describing at least 2 of the documents. You get a point for using 2 documents to support your argument, and then you get another point for using 4 documents to support your argument. So what that means is if we describe and use 4 of the 5 documents correctly, we're going to get 3 points here. And that's a change because normally we only get 2 points there. So using the documents is key. Obviously with any DBQ, using the documents is key. In this scenario, the thesis and the contextualization exactly as they were before. Those are going to be in your intro paragraph. You'll start with your contextualization, then you'll have your thesis at the end of your intro paragraph that outlines your argument. And then, of course, your body paragraphs are going to describe and use all 5 of the documents. In those body paragraphs as well is where you're going to have your outside evidence and your happies. Now, we have to do each of these things, outside evidence and happy, twice correctly. You'll notice that if you use a piece of outside evidence, you get a point. If you use another one, you get another point. Same with happying. You do 1 correctly, you get a point. You happy 2, you get another point. And then down at the bottom, the counter argument. So what we're looking at, guys, is either a 4 or 5 paragraph essay, as always. And we are using the documents, we are describing them, and then we are inserting pieces of outside evidence and happy when we can to grab those points there. I'm going to talk about each and every one so that we're comfortable with getting the points for this type of essay. Right off the bat, same strategy as any DBQ. You get a prompt. Now, we know that the time periods of this essay are going to fall between circa 1200 to 1900. That's what we're looking at as far as what years can fall into this essay period. And so what we need to know is we need to know what's going on in each time period so that we're able to contextualize effectively and we're able to put our facts right. So when we get a prompt, it's going to have a date range. Let's say 1450 to 1750. We got to know those date ranges and we got to make sure we can understand what's going on in that time period, and whatever's going on in that time period, how does it relate to the prompt? So of course the time period is important, and also what's it asking us specifically? Is it asking us economic factors? Is it asking about the economy? And is it also qualifying where we can talk about? If it says Eurasia, then we can only talk about Europe and Asia. If it's talking about the Americas, then we can talk about North America, South America, the Caribbean. But it depends, obviously, on what the prompt gives us. Very important, guys. No matter what, the most important thing you can do is answer the prompt. Make sure you're answering the prompt when you do these things. Now, then the second step is to outline your documents. Now, we only have 5 documents, so that should be quicker, obviously, than your other DBQs in which we had 7 documents. Now, that's where it gets a little tricky, the time, guys, because timing on this essay, we only have 45 minutes to do it. And, how long then should your outlining period take? I wrote about 10 to 12 minutes, and that's still a long time. I told you before to outline for 15 minutes for 7 documents. The reason why I'm telling you guys this 10 to 12 minutes outline period, guys, is that this is really the most important part of the essay, is the outlining. If you can effectively break down each document, how is it providing evidence? Try to do that for all 5 documents. If you do in your outline, can I happy this document? How am I going to happy this document? And what is my outside evidence going to be? If you can do all of that before you start writing, then the essay really writes itself. The thesis is there. You can identify Okay, my documents are saying this could be my thesis. Boom, I'm going to put that right there, and then you use each document and you insert the happies or the outside evidence accordingly. It's been a while since we've done this, so let's talk through this stuff. So let's say, we get a prompt, a sample prompt, and it says, in what ways did the Great Depression lead to changes in governing in the United States and Europe between 1920 and 1945? This is a perfect example of a type of question you might get. Now, obviously, I've picked the time period outside of our range to use as an example. We're not going to get questions between 1920 and 1945. But this is good practice for ourselves. So let's just say that each document, each source is what we see right here. You look at source one, and it's a New Deal law. The New Deal, obviously, in the United States under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is promoting relief for the Great Depression. And then source two, document two, is Mussolini, and he's quoting on the strength of Italy. And you're like, aha, that looks very fascist to me. That looks like a fascist quote. And then you see source three is Francisco Franco of Spain, and he's writing about his belief in strong government. And source four is a quote from British economist John Maynard Keynes, and Keynes promoted deficit spending, which was part of the things that the United States used in their shift to battle the Great Depression. And then source five, a map of the Nazi Third Reich in Europe. Now notice one of your sources, and it might not be source five, but one of the five sources is not going to be a quote. It's going to be a non-text source. That's what the College Board has told us. So a non-text source, guys, that can be any number of things. It can be a political cartoon, it can be a map, it can be a chart. In this case, it's a map of the Nazi Third Reich. So in this case, we have our five sources. And so right off the bat, I look at the prompt. In what ways did the Great Depression lead to changes in governing in the United States and Europe? Okay, I know from my own knowledge that the United States became more liberal. There was a shift to welfare to try to help the people with deficit spending, those kind of things. So I'm looking at source one, the New Deal, which was very liberal. And then I'm looking at source four, John Maynard Keynes, and I'm going to say this is evidence that the United States has taken a shift to liberalism. That's going to be one of my buckets right there. I'm going to have a bucket on a shift to liberalism. And sure enough, here's my bucket one down here, a shift to liberalism and more welfare by the United States. And then I look at Mussolini, I look at Franco, and I look at this glorified Nazi Third Reich in Europe, and I say, this is all fascism right here. This is evidence that the Great Depression led to a shift to fascist governments. So of course, these are going to be my two buckets because they're my two buckets. These two things, bucket one and bucket two, are going to be my thesis. So the nice thing about the DBQ is we don't have to pick a skill, guys. We don't have to do a skill here. All we have to do is really restate the prompt in a way that answers the prompt in the geographic location and in the time period using my buckets. So that's exactly what I did here. The prompt says, in what ways did the Great Depression lead to changes in governing in the United States and Europe between 1920 and 1945? I've got my buckets right here. So I simply say, between 1920 and 1945, the Great Depression led to the United States government to become more liberal and use welfare programs, while in Europe, the Great Depression led to a rise of conservative fascist governments. Boom. That's what I've done. I've simply applied my buckets to the prompts. I've answered the prompts with an argument that I can argue using the documents. There's my thesis right there. That should be a point that every one of us grabs on the AP test. Okay, so of course, the first paragraph is always our contextualization and our thesis. My thought process on here, first of all, let's define contextualization. 5 to 7 sentences. You are setting the historical stage for your essay. That is key. That's the most important thing. If somebody was reading your essay and you just launched into your thesis right away, they have no context. All of a sudden, you're just talking about how the Great Depression led to changes. Talk to it, set the stage. What is the Great Depression, right? Where are these countries? What are they shifting from? How is their government shifting from one thing to another thing? That's what your contextualization does. It sets the historical stage for your essay. You need to have proper nouns in there, specific evidence. I tell you at least 2 proper nouns, and every time you use a proper noun, doesn't matter where you do it in your essay, you have to make sure that you define or describe that proper noun. So, since my thesis is talking about how the Great Depression led to shifts in the United States and Europe, my contextualization is going to be on the Great Depression. It's going to set the stage. And so I wrote this as my contextualization. I said, after World War I, which ended in 1918, the economies of Europe lay in ruins. Germany was especially hard hit, having to pay a large amounts of reparations to Britain and France due to the Treaty of Versailles. Treaty of Versailles was a treaty that ended World War I and was especially hard hit on Germany. Notice there, I spell it out, right? I use Treaty of Versailles as a proper noun. I'm going to define it right there. Then, just as many countries were beginning to economically recover, the U.S. stock market crashed in 1929. Okay, I'm talking about the U.S. stock market crash. Let me describe that, right? Investors lost billions, banks in Europe and the United States collapsed, and the world unemployment rates rose to 30%. Governments in Europe and the U.S. needed to adapt to meet the new challenges the Great Depression presented. Aha, right there, I have set the stage. Why are governments shifting because of the Great Depression? I have introduced the argument there. I've set the historical context, and then I would put my thesis, which is in bold right there. So in order, what I have done is I've broken down the prompts. I have bucketed. I've broken down each document. I have bucketed them together. That helped me write my thesis. And then once I had my thesis, how can I set the stage for my thesis? That's when I put my contextualization, right? So then I have my body paragraphs, and my body paragraphs, each one of them, in this case, I only have 2 buckets. So I'll only have 2 body paragraphs. If I had 3 buckets, I would have 3 body paragraphs, but I only have 2 buckets, so I only have 2 body paragraphs. Each body paragraph is going to start with a topic sentence that simply introduces one of the buckets. So my next body paragraph would be, the Great Depression led the United States government to become more liberal and use welfare programs. That's how I would start my first body paragraph, and then I would use documents to provide evidence of this. Okay, how do you describe and use documents? I am telling you guys to describe and use all 5 documents. You're only given 5. That's easier than the 7 that you're given on most DBQs. It is my belief that we should attempt to describe and use all 5 documents. If you make a mistake on one, you can still get all 3 evidence points in this category. We should go for it. It only takes 1 sentence to describe a document. It only takes 1 sentence to use a document. This isn't something that's incredibly time consuming, so we should go for it. We should do it. Okay, to describe the document, physically, what is the document? You know, if it's a quote from Benito Mussolini, then all you have to do is you have to describe in your own words, this is a quote from Benito Mussolini saying this. That's what describing the document is. It's very simple. And then how does it support your thesis? If your thesis is talking about how the Great Depression led to a shift to fascism, then you're going to say, this is a quote from Benito Mussolini, and it is showing a shift to fascism caused by the Great Depression because of this. I mean, very simple. And I outline it for you right here. It says, document 2 is a quote from Benito Mussolini in 1931. Mussolini says, the truth is that men are tired of liberty. Democracy is beautiful in theory. In practice, it's a fallacy. Every anarchist is a baffled dictator. It's good to trust others. Not to do so is much better. Fascism is a religion. The 20th century will be known in history as the century of fascism. Okay, so he's criticizing democracy. He's promoting fascism. Here we go. So document 2 is a quote from Benito Mussolini criticizing democracy and promoting his chosen style of government, fascism. That's me describing the document right there. What is it? It's a quote from Mussolini. This is what it's saying. Very simple. Notice I did not quote. You cannot quote when you describe or use the documents. Put them in your own word. Then to have it support my thesis, to link it to my thesis, I simply wrote, Mussolini pointed to the suffering during the Great Depression as a failure of democracy and used it to promote a shift from power vested in the people, democracy, to the power vested in himself in a fascist government. There, I have described the document. I have used the document right there. If I did that for all 5 documents, I would get 3 evidence points. Boom, I would get all of my evidence points. However, we know that for 2 documents, we need to explain them further. We need to happy the documents. So let's kind of look at how we do that. For 2 of the documents, to explain them, we need to show why the historical context, the purpose, the point of view, or the intended audience helps explain the document further. Now, guys, that's a key point in happying. Happying tends to be the hardest thing to do on DBQs because not only are you going to identify what the purpose of the document is or what the historical context of the document is, you have to explain why it matters. You have to explain why it matters. And so I want to kind of I did all 4 examples of this to help explain what a good happy looks like. Okay, we have the same quote from Benito Mussolini. You only have to pick one of the 4 options. You could do historical context, you could do purpose, point of view, or intended audience, any one that you want. But not only do you have to identify what the purpose is, you also have to explain why it helps explain the document further. Examples. The historical context of this document is that Italy was riddled with poverty after World War I and insulted by democratic governments like England, France, and the United States by the Treaty of Versailles, as Italy was denied fiume after the war. This caused Mussolini to heavily distrust democratic governments. Now, that second sentence in bold there, that's explaining the document further. See, why is he so critical of democracy? This historical context helps explain why he was critical of democracy. And that's a key point. If I simply just said that first sentence there, it wouldn't explain the document further. And that's the key. And I do that for all 3 other types of happy here. The purpose of this document was for Mussolini to influence the people of Italy to dislike democracy and support his new fascist government. Okay, that's good. Now help me explain this further. Thus, Mussolini is saying this to keep power for himself. So purpose there, why is Mussolini saying this? He's saying it to keep power for himself. Notice for purpose, guys, and this is a mistake that we made on our first DBQ, that when you're saying purpose, it's not purpose why the document is in the essay. It's purpose why in 1931 Mussolini said that. That's important. The purpose of why the quote was said in the original time it was said. That's what purpose is about. Point of view. The point of view of this document is Benito Mussolini, who is the inventor of the term fascism. As Mussolini invented fascism himself, he would be heavily motivated to defend fascism against other forms of government. Aha. So I know a little bit about Benito Mussolini here. I know he coined the term fascism. That might help explain why he would be defending it right here, right? So that's explaining it further. And then finally, the intended audience of the document is the people of Italy, who Benito Mussolini needs to support him as dictator. As he is speaking to the people of Italy, he's intentionally discouraging democracy and promoting fascism as a better government choice. There will be a little bit of overlap between these 4 things. Remember, you don't have to use all 4. You only have to pick one. And when you outline your documents, you should say, aha, like, I think I can happy this document. Put that in your outline. So when you're writing your essay, you know which ones you're going to be happy. And you're not just trying to come up with things on the spot. Okay, outside evidence. Unlike the original DBQ where you only need 1 piece of outside evidence, this time you need 2 pieces of outside evidence. But that's good, because that's outside evidence is a pretty easy point to gain. Essentially what you're doing is just inserting a little SAQ into body paragraphs, and you're going to put them in your body paragraphs either after you describe and use a document, or if you decide to happy that document, you could also put your outside evidence after you're happy. So it doesn't matter whether you happy a document or not, you can still provide outside evidence when referring to the same document. You just have to put 2 pieces of outside evidence, at least 2, in your body paragraphs. So again, outside evidence is just adding a proper noun, defining that proper noun, and then linking it to whatever it is your argument is. I'll give an example of this. So once again, same quote for Benito Mussolini here. This is me using the document again. We've gone this already, talked about this already. Document 2 is a quote from Benito Mussolini criticizing democracy, promoting his chosen style of government. Mussolini pointed to the suffering during the Great Depression as a failure of democracy and used it to promote a shift from power vested in the people to a power vested in himself in a fascist government. Okay, that's me using the document. And then here is where, I am inserting in a piece of outside evidence. When I use a piece of outside evidence, guys, I'm always going to start it with this, a piece of evidence not mentioned in the documents. That right there is a little sign to your reader that you're using outside evidence. This is a big neon sign. This is me gaining one of the points on the rubric. and I'm going to promote a proper noun here. I'm going to say Mussolini promoted corporatism as part of his fascist government. Corporatism, defined by Mussolini, was all aspects of the economy. The workers, the owners, and the government all worked together for the better of the country. Mussolini promoted corporatism to help Italy get out of the depression, but also to justify his own complete control over the Italian economy. I threw in corporatism. It wasn't mentioned in the documents, and this is a way in me that I can tie together my knowledge of fascism to the prompts, right? That's what the outside evidence is all about. Use a proper noun, define that proper noun, link it back to your argument. That's how you use outside evidence. And again, we have to do that twice in our essay. And then finally, our counter argument. That is our final paragraph of our essay. It doesn't matter whether you write a 4-paragraph essay or whether you write a 5-paragraph essay. You should end with your counter argument is the only thing in that last paragraph. And basically what you're asking is, can you argue the other side of your main argument, right? In this case, we've just spent our entire essay arguing that the Great Depression led to a liberal shift in the United States and a shift of fascism in Europe. So basically what I need to show is that I can show the reader that I know that there's exceptions to my argument, or there's another side to the argument. So in this final paragraph in my counter argument, I can do that in 2 ways. One is I can show an example in the United States or in Europe that did not follow the shift that I argued in my essay. Or I can say, yes, while the Great Depression led to these shifts, there's a more important reason that led to the shifts. A counter argument would be that more important than the Great Depression was this, right? Or an example in the US or in Europe where they didn't shift liberally or to fascism was this. And so my counter argument here was, I said, a counter argument to the Great Depression causing a shift of fascism in Europe is the shift to complete communism in the Soviet Union in Europe. I specify in Europe here to show, hey, the Soviet Union's in Europe, and this wasn't a shift to fascism. I said the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin promoted an entirely different government and economy than the fascist governments of Italy or Germany. Unlike corporatism in Italy, Stalin promoted giant agrarian farms called kolkhots that were owned and shared by hundreds of workers. In addition, Stalin promoted 5-year plans establishing quotas in industries like steel, which encouraged the workers of the country to come to the cities and revive the economy that way. As a result of the Great Depression, the Soviet Union became more communist, which is a counter-argument to the Great Depression, causing a shift of fascism in Europe. All I've done here, guys, is I have said, hey, here's an exception to everything that I just said. And what you're really showing here is a nuance. You're showing that I actually understand this whole subject. And while I can make a great argument that the Great Depression caused this shift, here's a counter-argument to that. Here's an exception to that. And that gets you that last point of the essay, the complex point. Very simple, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something from this. And we will be practicing this a ton, but this is some things that, the basics of the modified DBQ.